John Tuckner from Secure Annex. So you've started your own company initially to analyze Chrome extensions, and that's how we met. And I'll tell the story. But eventually, you expanded into finding security issues in IDE extensions. You've also found a ton of malware in the wild, and you have some blog posts on that. And finally, you actually hacked me once. You took over my browser with my consent, of course, and we'll talk about that at the end. But first, I wanted to talk about how we met. So I just made a video talking about CRX Examiner, like the tool I made to scan Chrome extensions. That was like a little bit over a year ago. I tweeted about Chrome extension security once, and it just summoned you. You just materialized. Apparently, whenever someone talks about Chrome extension security, you just materialize. And then I was in a Slack where I was asking for feedback on my tool, and Rami McCarthy actually dropped your name. He said like, hey, like you should talk to John Tuckner. And we started talking, and so we started nerding out over this. And I found it was interesting that we both kind of like started our own tools and looking into Chrome extension security at the same time. So I was curious, like, what initially prompted you to get into the field?
Yeah, I have done so much in security as a practitioner for the past like 15 years, and I am just kind of always obsessed with problems that don't seem to be getting fixed. That everybody, we have these massive companies that have such large budgets. Why can't they fix these issues that are some of the most meaningful, but are often overlooked by most organizations? And you really just have to kind of weigh this like opportunity of how big is the problem with how much should people actually know about it. And I'm a big advocate for just like go out and talk about problems that exist. And the more that people are aware that some security issues are existing, that then it can actually get fixed for a majority of people. And well, lo and behold, browser extensions were that spot. And now it's kind of become this entirely new segment of security where you have these plugins into your most utilized tools like Claude and IDE extensions. And now we have MCP servers, and it's just so wide ranging now. It's really scary that these extensions get access to the most critical information that we use every single day.
Yeah, there was definitely insane scope creep in your project. But yeah, so basically you found that there's browser extensions, no one cares about them, and it's a big avenue for risk. So let's do something about it. So was there anything already being done in the area before?
Well, I think a lot of people that have done any browser extension research in the past had used CR Excavator, which was an awesome project for the longest time. And just as security goes, you have these like free tools that everybody knows, loves, uses, and that forms the foundation for so many security programs. Well, what happens when those disappear overnight, right? And even during my ideation, like I didn't think CR Excavator was getting as much love as it could. Once you have a baseline feature set, there's so much more that could be done, and especially with AI becoming so much more powerful since CR Excavator started. What if you just applied that to the space? Well, while I was starting up this idea of like analyzing browser extensions, CR Excavator just quit functioning for a while. And that really gave me a big push and a great sign to say, okay, this is something you need to launch. This is something that is super meaningful and that you need to go all in on and totally go forth on. And I'm sure you felt the same way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have the same like origin story in the area. Like I was also using CR Excavator, and for context, that was a free tool made by Duo Security. And yeah, I also like I remember it was down for like maybe a couple of months, and I realized that was like the only way. Like occasionally someone would be like, hey, I'm gonna download this Chrome extension. I'll be like, oh, like I don't like what should I do about that? And I guess I'll just use CR Excavator, and it was down, and I realized like I don't know what to do. And at the time, that's how I thought, like, oh, I'll just make my own, and I called it something similar, CR Examiner. Yeah. So yeah, CR Excavator was down. You were like, okay, I'll just make my own thing. And what was like the first challenge you felt when making your own security tool?
I mean, there's so much, right? And like especially starting a company too, like hand in hand, like balancing what the company needs versus what just the tool needs. Like it's great. And I think this is, probably something that you feel a little, right? If like you launch this tool and it's great and you can get a lot of value out of it, but that like continual maintenance and that upkeep of keeping it alive, making sure that there's new features, that's super hard. I guess as far as a tool goes and like the problems or like the impact of a tool. It's just, how do you create something that's just so consistent every single day and gives people the same amount of value no matter what the extension is? And there's like, I don't know, I probably analyze over 1 million extensions, right? And so how do all of like the nuances not break, and how do you reliably get value to, or outcomes and real analysis to people that want to analyze any given extension and any given scenario? It's super hard. And so, I think a lot of your early research was like, why does this extension have access to Salesforce and GitHub? And why does my CRO need to change all of the font to Comic Sans? And what people don't realize is like the scope and impact that some of these permissions within extensions can actually have to an organization.
Yeah. So I think the main difference between me and you is you actually made this your full-time job. Like, so you started a whole company around it. You've been like shipping on this product continuously and making a lot of progress. And I was curious, I think a challenge with that is you want to sell it to people. You want to basically convince people why they should care, why they should actually use their tool and bring it into their own corp. So how did you tackle that? How did you convince people that they should care about Chrome extension?
Yeah. When you get into it, the EDR has become so powerful. There's so many tools that we know and utilize day in, day out to prevent attacks, and like identity tools to know when a phishing attack has happened or somebody's trying to like get through MFA. All these things prevent most attacks nowadays. And so what attackers are moving towards are these gaps that a lot of people are overlooking, and these capabilities that are just kind of foundational to things like passkeys working. But when you use things like browser extensions, you can defeat that by like capturing sessions and being able to exfil real meaningful content from web pages. And so it's really just like, while there's a status quo in security and everybody feels confident that they've set up some controls of what they have and like how to actually prevent most attacks, attackers are always going to evolve, and there's always going to be some new gap in a lot of these security programs. Extensions just seem to be the one. And, I'm still very early in the company. What I find commonly is that if you solve a problem, you can solve it for the people that know the problem exists, that have been looking for a solution, have been wanting something to exist, and are just like ready to go and ready. They know that the problem exists, and they're ready to solve it. So a lot of like the early adoption has just been people that totally get the problem and are really pushing me for like newer features and deeper analysis and better outcomes and like more marketplaces, more analysis. And it really kind of takes off from there. I'm lucky that I found a little bit of fit and that people actually did think that this was a problem. And now it's kind of getting to the phase of how do I convince somebody that has never thought about browser extensions that this is something actually meaningful to them? So yeah. I mean, it's a big evolution, and it just depends on the stage and how mature that the market is, and also how long that you kind of exist in the market.
And in a bit, we'll get into how some of your clients expanded the scope of the tool. But first, when you're initially talking to some clients, some of them are allies, but what about the ones who actually push back? Like, what was some of the common pushbacks you got? Like, did some people say like, "Oh, we already have CrowdStrike. Why would I need to care?" Like some excuses like that.
I think one of the most common pieces of pushback is that eventually a lot of these extensions get removed from the marketplaces. And so if there is something bad going on, a Google, a Microsoft, and Anthropic are actually going to remove these things from being listed or prevent them from being installed. Or you might even be able to take an approach and just list a handful of extensions, and then you're probably well off from any risks or any problems then. I think it's a balance between like that perspective and then also just like caring about the attack vector and the type of information that could be stolen. I think that changes over time. What I kind of like look for customers and for people that I want to partner with, it's like people that understand that kind of dwell time of an extension existing. Like even if I were to be able to tell you in 3 weeks that this extension's bad, the fact that has been installed for so long really eats away at them, and they want to do something about it today and really lower their risk potential. Because once you realize that something is malicious or has been updated and it went overlooked, then you have a real problem. And triaging this after the fact has been historically really hard, because once a extension gets removed from the marketplace, you lose a lot of the forensic analysis there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so initially you were focusing on browser extensions. I think it was Chrome at first, and then you expanded to some other browsers. I want to talk a little bit about how you present the data. So one challenge I had was that you can, you fetch a extension, you unzip it, you start enumerating findings, and then how do you actually display it to the user in a way that's meaningful? And I came up with the critical, high, medium severity overall risk level. I think you had an interesting way. You have like three different categories. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it really resonates with people differently for no matter what. So if somebody wants to utilize my tool, I do like an AI analysis of what the extension actually does. I do risk scoring, so I can provide you a number that you can say anything over a risk score of like 20 or like something, seems pretty critical. I want to definitely take a second look at that. And then there's a ton of factors like detections and known attacks and known behaviors that you can create signatures on. And which one of those is ever the most accurate, it's or like is absolutely the singular one to look at. I have a hard time telling you that, because they all have different factors. And what the way that I approach it today is like, I think that AI has really unlocked so much for our understanding of code and our understanding of these applications that we utilize day in, day out. So, for the longest time, we've just been shipped an executable or like a keygen from, I remember in my teenage years, I would just get a keygen for something to unlock a piece of software. And I have no idea what I actually installed or what was running behind the scenes, but I actually got my value out of it. I think the same way about browser extensions. While they might provide a little bit of value, you don't know, it's been very unclear of what the browser extension is actually doing behind the scenes, and if it's tracking you across multiple or other websites, right? And so while a risk might be a good starting point to be able to say, yeah, this is risky or not, it really goes into, okay, are there any known detection signatures? Are there any patterns of behaviors that you can utilize to give you some direction into a single, like to say that this is stealing session cookies or anything like that based on code patterns. And then you can step into just reading a small paragraph about the risk that the extension might present to you or your organization. And so like all of those factors are really to get a clear picture of something, you need to consider all of that. And while AI is good for like finally creating a natural language summary of code, what I've also found and what I'm very bullish on is that like these abstractions that we're creating, these web UIs and these displays of information to people, I think a lot of that's breaking down over time too. And so being able to just, and a lot of my strategy is how can you just ask questions of the applications that you're utilizing and be able to get an output or get an understanding of, does this present GDPR implications, or how does this impact my access to Salesforce, or much deeper questions that any singular analysis can't really capture at a given point in time. So, I think we're at a really interesting spot where you can start giving new and really interesting types of understanding into a lot of different aspects of security.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask you a few questions about the AI analysis, but first, I was curious. So you have three pillars in your initial rating, which is availability, maintenance, and ownership. How did you pick those? And like, for example, why ownership?
Yeah. So ownership is a great example of like, is does the provenance of this extension, has that stayed with the person that created it, or did that extension become too popular and have to be sold so that the developer could get some compensation for it? And I think that's like a really interesting one. Availability, a lot of these extensions, even though you get sent a link to a marketplace listing, that listing might actually be unlisted. And so it won't be indexed by search engines, and being able to understand maybe this was removed for a couple weeks at any given point in time. Should I understand like the past of this extension versus it just being existing in a marketplace today. And the other one is maintenance. And so is it being updated regularly? Does it have regular like updates? How often is it being updated? Is it updated once a month, or has it been updated once in the past 5 years? And that just so happened to be the last week, right? And so being able to provide some numerical understanding of the past of the extension, that really makes a difference.
So actually about that, something you do that I don't is you maintain previous versions of an extension. You store them, and you also different versions together.
Yeah, that's been the critical piece, right? And like any analysis at any given point in time is really good to have, but tomorrow that extension could get updated, or even without an update could change owners, and it could have a completely different outlook on the risk and the understanding of that extension. What I've been able to find very recently is I have like a date picker now too, so it's almost like an internet archive where you can go back to a specific date and time and understand, even though the extension didn't update, the marketplace listing changed from like a web archiving tool to a malicious crypto wallet. And it's super nasty. Even if somebody were to install that, they would have gotten an auto update once the attack actually like was triggered. That extension would auto update on the device, and then that new extension would be there. And so even if somebody thought that they were just installing like a web archiving tool, it's now a malicious extension on the endpoint.
And how many extensions are you storing?
Like hundreds of thousands, and like per version, yeah, it's quite a bit. And so
Does that get expensive?
I mean, it does get expensive, but it's also, I think it's a really critical piece of this and value, because once, like, as I mentioned, once an attack is actually found, or once an extension is declared malicious, it usually gets removed from the marketplaces. And so you can't even go to the marketplace listing. Being able to download like old code is very hard. What we've found is a lot of extensions that get compromised, they have a malicious version pushed out. Once the attack has been found by the actual owner of the extension, a new version is released, and now everybody's scrambling to go and find the historical version to understand, okay, this is how the attack went out. These are the types of behaviors that I need to look for in my organization, or even just knowing that they had that extension of that version, that the client had been updated. It can be very opaque to a security team that like that's what actually happened with an extension at any given time if there was a breach.
Didn't that come in handy? Weren't you like, there was a malicious extension once and you pulled like an old version?
It's actually come up the last couple of years where most recently Trust Wallet was compromised. And so there was a crypto stealer, wallet stealer that was injected into a Trust Wallet, which had a couple million people utilizing it. And then in the past, with a breach of a company called Cyberhaven, which was actually a larger string of phishing related compromises of extensions, a lot of the extensions had new versions released. And so teams were struggling and scrambling to try and figure out what was the actual malicious code that was released. And I was able to provide that information to those teams very quickly.
Yeah, a lot of value in storing old versions. So one thing I wanted to ask about is in AI analysis, when you're generating AI analysis, you're using APIs, and so there's costs associated with that. I've also been doing that with my app and using the Claude API, and overall it's been like maybe like half a cent per extension scanned. I mean, I do limit the output window to 500 tokens, I think. How did you handle just cost and trying to make it consistent when dealing with AI APIs?
I really take it from the perspective like this is the main value prop, that AI understanding of code is the main piece that we've always been missing and that everybody wishes had existed. So I really kind of just internalize that as like, this is the value that the company provides, right? And so the service, the tool, everything, the reason why you invest in this is these deep insights, and that help everything else, help like direction, and help understand like what is actually going on in these extensions and suss out the stuff that's really bad earlier. So yeah, I kind of just like, no matter what it would cost, I mean, there's obviously a limit, but I definitely eat it. And I definitely try and do as much as possible to be able to get the best understanding of things. And if that means like running a deeper agent and larger context windows and more information, like it does get pretty gnarly. And I've had to go through a bunch of iterations where I've spent far too much money
Mhm.
in order to actually get the outcomes that I'm looking for. But, at the end of the day, like I think what I really love about starting a company and actually just trying to bring this solution to as many people as possible is that I can take risks that a lot of people don't really would not want to, just to see if this is a great experiment for me to just to see, is there value here and can I bring
Mhm.
it to as many people and try and solve this problem once and for all for as many people as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Worth it. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about how this scope creep worked in your app. So the first version, you were scanning Chrome extensions specifically, and you were like, hey, clients, like here's an app to scan Chrome extensions. And what did they start asking for you to start expanding to other areas?
Yeah, like Chrome extensions are obviously the majority of the extensions that exist for
Hmm.
browsers. And even if you use something like an Edge or Brave, you'll install extensions from the Chrome marketplace most likely. So you kind of like cover off a number of browsers just by understanding what's in the Chrome Web Store. And that's where most developers publish their extensions also. But what I ended up getting into with like a lot of my first conversations is, yeah, we don't really lock people down to a singular browser, so it's Chrome, and then we just have like 30 people using Edge, and we have 15 people using Firefox, and we have one person using Arc, and so on and so forth. And the list got pretty large, and they did have some extensions for each of those platforms. It wasn't the same quantity and scope as Chrome, but they said like, well, why would you just do Chrome when you could do everything else as well? And so, very valid point, and there's probably a lot that's just kind of lurking within the Microsoft Edge store, and lo and behold, Firefox is actually, there's been a lot of attacks happening in there as well from people that think that it's a very privacy conscious browser. I think a lot of attackers are taking advantage of that with potentially even more lax review cycles in the Firefox add-ons. But once you kind of capture a lot of the browser marketplace share, a lot of people were looking to me, and there were a lot more attacks happening with IDE extensions. They thought I was just the extension guy. And so why not just do all extensions, and anything that is an extension, you don't want to have to go to your boss and say, hey, we need this one tool for browser extensions, and we need this other tool for code extensions, and we need this other tool for MCP servers. The more that this is going to get packaged up and this layer of understanding, they all operate about the same way, where there's supposed to be a trusted marketplace or registry where you install these things from that and all of these extensions have been reviewed and could be taken down at a moment's notice when there is malware. But like, who's actually doing that review and who's actually providing those insights? And so it really makes a lot of sense to go out, provide that analysis, and be proactive to people that are actually interested in solving this problem.
Well, yeah, yeah, and I thought that was an awesome call. Like just pivoting from browser extensions into ID extensions felt like a very natural next step.
And like the nice part so far is that a lot of the code and the structure of all of these extensions are a lot of the same. So predominantly JavaScript have like declared entry points and say, this is how the function starts, and this is how the extension starts with this function. This is how you can capture information from websites, and like how you can interact and how you can call out to third-party services. All of these things and behaviors are very similar across all the things that I'm analyzing. And so you can take a lot of the shared knowledge and a lot of the shared like structure of how to analyze these things and apply it to, something new. So even if you think that MCP servers and code extensions and browser extensions are all different, structurally they all have the same framework. And so it's been easy to apply this like general thought process to all of them.
And you found malware. So you found malware in both browser extensions and ID extensions. And I want to cover both. First, in browser extensions. So you mentioned, I remember also about a year ago, there was the Cyberhaven compromise. So there was a phishing campaign. They got into their account and published a edit of their browser extension. And I remember you were investigating it, and you found that it was part of a larger campaign. So I was curious, what were some of the most interesting malware campaigns you found in browser extensions in general?
Yeah. And really where a lot of browser extensions that have existed are, you know, kind of like long-standing. They do something very like almost more innocuous than true malware, where they're just kind of tracking you. It's much more of the info stealer vibe, where it's trying to capture some information rather than like try to steal cookies 100% of the time or take screenshots of every web page that you visit. Like those are all still possibilities. Predominant these like larger campaigns that impact 6 million, 8 million types of users are much more secretive and much more deep in how they infiltrate organizations. I'll say one larger attack campaign that I found very recently and like was pretty widespread across 50 extensions or so. These extensions would be unlisted in the marketplace, so nobody would be able to really find them. They were delivered through adware. And so if you visited a sketchy website, it said install this extension. This extension is an antivirus. It'll keep you safe. But what it was really doing it was tracking you every website that you went to, and that had the capability to execute remote code as well. So even when it says, hey, I went to Facebook, the extension would send that to a remote server. The remote server would reply back. And in that reply could be instructions on here, you need to scrape this part of the website, or you need to execute this function as part of the like just behaviors when you're on that website. And when you have something that's just so wide reaching and have the same patterns, like that's like super scary to me. But I think a lot of people would even say like that's not traditional malware. And so this understanding of like browser extensions in general and the type of information that they have access to, it's still something that a lot of people need to like kind of come to terms with and understand. Here's how it could impact me.
And so when you pivoted into IDE extensions, you also found a bunch of malware. Can you first talk a little bit about OpenVSX, like what it is?
Yeah. And what really got me interested in IDE extensions was the kind of introduction of AI coding tools. So like Cursor, Windsurf, now we have anti-gravity, all these VS Code forks. What was happening in the spring of 2025 was that Microsoft was catching on that these coding forks were taking a lot of, or were utilizing VS Code, the source code of that, and making a lot of money off of it. And they thought, how can we enforce licensing restrictions on these things, even though it's open source? The main point of cutoff was the extension marketplace. So, when you open up VS Code and you start a Python app, it'll say, do you want to install the Python extension so that everything's formatted and you have some additional tools available to you? Those are all the extensions that exist. And there's thousands of them. There are multiple thousands of them. What ended up happening was Microsoft cut off access to Cursor and other IDE extension or IDE forks, and they all pivoted over to a marketplace called OpenVSX, which was a much more open extension registry, like almost overnight. And that team was very much caught by surprise. Like it was not the size of Microsoft. And, when something like that happens, a lot of people catch wind. And so if you can just sign up, publish an extension and call it like Python 2, and some people will utilize that, then you have a really big risk on your hands of install this Python extension. And now the crazy thing about code extensions is they're much more permissive and have access to run child processes and actually have they act as a developer, like that is running the extension. And so anything that developer would be able to do, the extension basically does as well. And so if you can just publish an extension and compromise a machine with a simple click to install the type button, I can't think of something that attackers would like more.
And what are some of the trends you saw with those malicious extensions on the?
Yeah, much more just overt malware. So you basically just have this extension that is very obfuscated and coded, but once you decode it, it basically just says, I want it. Like the early versions were just installing Screen Connect immediately, which is an RMM tool that people don't know. If people don't know, that basically gives the attacker full RDP access into a box, but they've definitely evolved now into a couple stages of C2 servers and being able to like call out to a couple of redirects. But the end goal has been pretty much the same, where if it's not Screen Connect, it's something like Mythic, or it's a much deeper encoded payload. That some of the most interesting attacks are happening in code extensions with like ether hiding and being able to use the blockchain for like persistent C2 communications. And so it's been really fun being on the bleeding edge of these new attacks and attack types. A lot of them, if they're not being wrapped up in these like phishing campaigns or something else through email, a lot of the attackers are utilizing these techniques in code extensions as well. And so, yeah, I see a lot of like the initial versions of malware by just analyzing code extensions.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember there was a bunch of them that were just spoofing the Solidity extension, like targeting crypto wallets. And they were like also like pumping up the number of downloads artificially.
Yeah, it's crazy. Solidity's probably been attacked for 8 months now, and I've probably caught 40, 50, 60 versions of this. And it's as simple as just an extension published with the name Solidity that has a different developer, a different GitHub user publishing it each time, a different namespace. But you can basically just run a detection, name equals Solidity, and you can know that it's malware once you know like what the good one is. And just something so basic like that and brazen has really just made me think like, what is going on with the marketplaces and how are they incentivized to actually respond to these attacks when they can't catch something as simple as just, hey, look at the next new Solidity package name, right?
And so about that, regarding the responsibility of like catching and preventing malicious extensions, like should that be on the end user using the extension marketplace, or are they supposed to be the ones completely blocking those?
I think the marketplace should do a very deep review of extensions and be able to collect patterns and known behaviors and signatures. I would say 90% of what I catch today are just pieces of malware that are being reused and have been caught multiple times over, but it takes the marketplaces a week sometimes in order to actually respond to these attacks. And even when you reply back to the marketplaces with an alert saying, hey, you should take a look at this, a lot of them just kind of look past it and say, well, we don't see the malware here, probably because it's too well encoded or something like that. And so you really need to like almost fight with them in order to get something removed. And that's just like on the reactivity side of things. It's like, obviously I don't see what the proactive means are. There's probably a number of extensions that don't make it into the marketplace, but sometimes I'm seeing extensions that are just there that literally call themselves malware, like I am malware, I am ransomware, getting published to the marketplace. And maybe there isn't that much like proactivity going on. It definitely makes me wonder every once in a while. But look, there's a lot of corporations that are hosting these registries, and I think they need to step up. And if not even the corporations, it needs to be the IDE vendors that are selling enterprise agreements as well.
And so, I mean, if they hired you as security at OpenVSX or some equivalent marketplace, and you had to what are some easy steps you would take to really prevent those malicious extensions from being published?
Yeah. And, the funny part is like a lot of the metadata and a lot of the really interesting signals are all based on like the publisher, the person that's actually releasing the malware. So it's funny, I sometimes don't even have to look at the code of the extension in order to know that like it is malware or will become malware or is kind of like staging and is just trying to set up something for an attack. So, there's a lot of these new GitHub accounts publishing extensions that will pump a very safe extension up to 10,000, 2 million downloads, something, in between there. And then eventually, once they get a handful of real installs, they'll actually push the malware. And so you need to be able to like catch it ahead of time and be able to know the signals. I'm not entirely sure if like marketplaces want to take that on themselves and be proactive on like calling something malware that isn't yet, but very confidently it will be. And so, I think that's why a lot of teams can like take it on themselves, be proactive, understand the extensions that their users are utilizing, and be able to uninstall things before like a real risky piece of malware is pushed or updated or anything like that. And so, yeah, I think while it's on the marketplaces, I think every organization has a little bit of the responsibility as well to be able to take an inventory and understand what their users are actually utilizing, and maybe standardize on some things or come up with an allow list of extensions that they should be using.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, author reputation of the author publishing the extension is definitely like a pretty strong signal.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how many GitHub accounts that have been generated, and a lot of them are weeks old. So, some they've been thinking about pushing malware for quite a while, just based on the age of the GitHub account. But at some point, they're just going to run out of these, and I don't know, maybe they've created 1,000 today, and then over the next course of the next year, that those accounts will age out. But at the same time, they need to consistently publish to that GitHub account, and they have to create new repos and show real activity and have a bio and all these other sorts of things. And so that gets a lot harder and a lot more time consuming for the attacker. And so I think that's a great way when you're doing that analysis, you can kind of impose a little bit of cost onto them
Yeah.
that way.
Have any like malware groups reached out to you like, hey, stop finding our malware?
There was one extension that has been pretty prolific that created a emoji and said, "This is Tuckner Duck," and published it in my name. And the extension was up for like a week, even though it was malicious and even though people knew that it was alive. And so that got me really frustrated that, you know, that the marketplaces wouldn't respond and like kind of defaming me in some ways. But, I think, yeah, it's been, that's a badge of honor that you had malware created in your name. I even if like I would not make another dollar on this, and this idea would just kind of go to waste, at least I say that, like, I made that level of impact on cybersecurity.
Yeah, cool. I think some of my last questions were around just running your own company. I mean, some of the challenges, you have to do everything. You have to do the technical work. You have to also do the sales work. You're the CFO, the CTO, everything, the chief marketing officer. How do you like just distribute your work, and what takes up the most time?
And I mean, we can be clear too, like, I'm doing this bootstrapped and solo.
Mhm.
So that was very intentional to say, like, I just want to see if this makes sense and if this can actually be a company without having to put more burden on taking funding, or, being able to have different objectives than what I really wanted to go for. So like, I really wanted to solve this cybersecurity problem and see if I could like create value for organizations versus like trying to create a $1 trillion company, right? And so, there's some in between there. I would love to, make this be valuable. And in order to make an impact, sometimes you have to like create revenue and do all of this. So anyways, yes, it was very intentional that I want all of the rules. I'm much more of a generalist personally. So if I get stuck doing one job for far too long, I get pretty bored at it. And I would rather, do that sales thing. And I would rather like wake up tomorrow and do marketing, and then do some security analysis and do an extension, and then do some dev work. And that's what really keeps me energized. I've been in a really great mind space. And one of my favorite parts of this is like, by just putting myself out there and putting out these ideas into the world, like a lot of people that think the same way or have had this problem have come to me and said, hey, like, let's nerd out on this. Let's actually try and do all of this together. And it's honestly been really cool to just see the opportunities that come up and be able to interact with like really cool people, beyond podcasts like this, and be able to like, I don't know, just wake up every day and be energized and say, okay, like this is how I'm going to make a difference today. And also all the mistakes that I make, they're all mine, right? So there's nothing else to blame. And, it's really humbling to know like how big of an idiot I am every single day, while also being able to make progress and actually, show up and see something like actually valuable come out of this. So I don't know. It's just been a great adventure so far, and anybody considering it would, I'm very early in my journey, but I have a lot of lessons learned. So if you ever need advice, please let me know.
Love to hear that. Love to hear that. And so, I mean, about networking, you do go to a lot of conferences. Do you have any coming up, or like, what are some of your favorite conferences to go to?
Yeah. So I think I'm going to get to DistrictCon
I
coming
couldn't find
up.
tickets. It's sold out.
Yeah, I know. So DistrictCon, I'm looking at Mile High or Wild West Mile High. So
Mhm.
that's over in Denver. And then you have the start of conference season with RSA. So I'll probably be at B-Sides, San Francisco, and be outside of RSA. I don't know if I'll be able to afford a booth yet, but yeah, time has probably passed on that. But I'll definitely be in San Francisco catching up with a lot of people there.
Cool. Anything else you want to bring up?
Did you want to get in more to the extension hack?
Oh, I forgot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I almost forgot. Yeah, so you hacked me. You took over my browser. How did you do that?
Yeah. So there was somebody like really smart that gave me the idea that, I would talk about how extensions could be sold for a profit. And somebody asked me, how hard could that actually be? And I said, well, I guess like I don't really know. I don't have any definitive proof, so I might as well go out and do it. So I was able to find a website called Extension Hub, and I messaged a developer on there. I found an extension with maybe like 5 people installed max. I didn't want to really have a deep impact or like actually push malware to people, but I did want to make a point and like actually explore this idea. And so I messaged them and I said, hey, I would love to buy your extension. Like let's arrange details for payment and let's get this all sorted. After a couple of days, we couldn't figure out how I could send money to an India bank account. And so they just said, all right, well, we'll figure this out later. You can just have the extension, and started the ownership transfer with Google support. And a couple days later, I have a new extension in my developer account. And so, truth be told, I only spent like $5 to register the developer account to be able to get the extension. And so I was able to tell you beforehand and say, hey, this is the extension I'm looking to buy. It has some like really interesting permissions that I know could be exploited by a malicious actor if malware could be pushed. And so the extensions that you would have already accepted and approved of, when I push out the new extension version and the malware that goes along with it, you now have this like new capability in your extension that you weren't expecting. And I could have redirected you to phishing websites or a lot of other very malicious things. And I think that was just like, it was about a week's worth of emails just back and forth with somebody in India and $5 in order to compromise you. But uh, at the same time, in doing the research, I was able to find an extension with 400,000 users with the same permission scope that was bought and sold for $100,000. And the owner, like the buyer of the extension, I was able to find a tweet by him saying that he took out a loan in order to buy the extension. So you have to imagine that guy's going to look to make his money back somehow. And if I was a bad actor, I would know a lot of quick ways to do that.
Right. And you have a really good blog post on secureannex.com about the whole thing. So that the whole story blew my mind. You find the Chrome extension marketplace and it's not fake. It actually works. People are selling extensions on it. People have bought big extensions on it. And so in this case, I had the extension installed because you told me to, because we were going to test it. But, it could have been a popular extension that I already had installed and many others have installed, like the one you saw. In this case, he was tweeting about it, but like, very easily could be a malicious actor that doesn't say anything, just takes it over. So one thing I was thinking about is like, in this case, there was no indication on my end that there was an ownership transfer, nor any sort of change of the extension itself. And initially I thought like, oh, like if the email changes, they should notify me. But then that's not really a solution, because then you would just sell the email that you registered the extension with, and that would bypass that. So I don't know, that seems like a vector that's still open and will continue to be open. And I guess if we can extrapolate, this would also apply to things like popular npm packages or really any third-party dependency.
Yeah. I think you're right that the vector is still like a little bit open, especially for Chrome extensions or browser extensions. A lot of developers create these as side projects and don't know that they're going to get as big as they do. And so it's generally tagged with a developer email that's personal and very tightly guarded. And so being able to transfer that email account is kind of unreasonable. And while maybe they could have or maybe you can still like set up a new account, transfer it to that one, and then transfer that to somebody else. I think you still understand, like there's still an ownership transfer lineage there that could be tracked. And so I don't like, it's very rare that I think that individual accounts can be compromised or can be sold aside from the extension. And a lot of people don't like look through, like think through this, right? And a lot of people selling extensions are good, you know, they mean well, but they don't know, they've never heard that like a lot of attackers will buy extensions and be able to push malware. But basically, like once you're in the extension game long enough, you realize that there's just people cold emailing your support email constantly looking to buy your extension. And anybody that has had a popular extension knows like how often that they get these messages, and they could sell it at any given point. If you go on Reddit, there's a subreddit called Chrome extensions. There's a lot of posts on there saying, should I sell my Chrome extension to this guy or this email? And almost all their replies are like, no, you'll inevitably just be tagged with like the guy that created the extension that now pushes malware, right? And so I think awareness is getting a little bit better, but it's definitely not very obvious. And like to just any general user that their extension was sold, no, there's no real notifications. And, you know, that's one key part of the platform that I created in order to give companies that heads up.
Yeah, so that real-time monitoring aspect is pretty useful to catch those scenarios. But yeah, I mean, awareness is increasing, but also so does the price of an extension. I feel like malicious actors are seeing the value in it, and so they're probably gonna raise the prices of what they're offering, what they're willing to pay for that sort of access. And that's like not even mentioning like nation state actors with like, you know, almost an unlimited budget.
Yeah, I don't know how deep we've gotten on this problem space, and how like has there been a nation state that has actually kind of tried to buy an extension and get access to very critical resources. I guess time will tell, but you know, it's not something that I'm hoping for. But yeah, definitely pretty scary.
Nice one. John Tuckner, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm John Tuckner on LinkedIn. I'm Tuckner on X, and I'm on Blue
Twitter.
Sky, Mastodon, all the socials. I try and post a little bit about browser extensions every day. So if you really want to nerd out, follow me there, and I'll get you some information about the new attacks that are coming out.